experimental or against the test. Some way you can test it, verify it. And it actually relies on, this is like the peanut butter. It says that question everything, don't believe. And that is why I said this is diagonally opposite. Even when you think to be true, you still look for evidences. And there is no gurus as such. For example, I was mentioning about, let's say, this gravitational wave, which unambiguously proved the presence of black hole. But essentially the reason within this material, whether I like it or not, they come up with some medicine. And that is why science has always been, or this objective materialistic way of exploring science has always been, not only learning about what is happening, but also it's a guide to action. It guides you, tells you that you do in this way, then only you can change something what is harming you. Science has always been a guide to action in that sense, because it relies on that fact that the cause must be there in this material world. You don't have to look for something out of this material world. Okay? For example, here I have kind of a cartoon and saying that, say I see that there are a lot of green vegetation growing and so on and so forth. It's like the observation I have. You are now looking for the cause. And then you say that, it's because we are passing through rainy season. But if somebody says that, no, this bloom, green and all these things that I see is because of something else which is beyond this nature, obviously you are bound to be wrong. So this is essentially to say that cause and effect obviously is there, but where do you look for cause? Essentially varies the moment you subscribe to materialistic approach or idealistic approach. Scientific approach or non-scientific approach. And then it says the method. Obviously now the things will come. All this I have said. But now we have to find out how to find that cause. There must be some method. No? The moment I understand the cause, then I can obviously change this cause, somehow changing the background in such a way, I will make myself save up, let's say, make myself out of body, right? So possibly in the beginning you remember they were talking about like boost your immunity, right? So obviously in that way you essentially do, but even to come to that point, you need to have a method. How do I do that? And actually it says that in science particularly this method is very, very uniquely defined. Although there are a lot of things we can talk about, but in crux I will be discussing it. It says that you start with, let's say you observe something. After you observe, that means you gather information. No? You observe there, you observe this, and so on and so forth, you gather the information. Once you gather the information, then you start asking questions. That why? Why I see this pattern? Why I see people are having, let's say, fever, throat sore, and all these things. And then you form a hypothesis. Hypothesis means you kind of say that maybe this is because of that, maybe this is because of this. There may be multiple hypotheses, but no hypothesis is out of the blue. Any hypothesis should comply with anything that has been established as science, right, in that sense. So you actually form a hypothesis and then you formulate some way to test that hypothesis, that is called experiment. And then after you test the hypothesis, if you see your predicted result is matching, you keep that hypothesis. If you see it is not complying with the experimental result, you discard the hypothesis. And that's how you go to the conclusion and picking up the hypothesis. This is explaining your observation in the most correct way. And since science believes on uniqueness of truth, if you have many hypotheses, only one hypothesis at most can survive. You cannot have two hypotheses considered as explaining the phenomena at the same time. If it is the case, then actually you are talking about the same thing, but there may be two different interpretation approaches. But they cannot be two different hypotheses. Anyway, so here is the essentially method. I will be repeating it. If there is some question, I can elaborate further, or maybe I just skip. So as I said, you first essentially have that both way it happens. You may ask question and then you relevant to that question you make some observation and gather information, or on the other way around. You observe something and then you ask question that why it is happening. So anyway, so you have, for example, let's say you ask question first, and then based on that you try to observe, for example, right? That why related to this question. For example, if I say, in today's time, I see the society is divided in patriarchy, the patriarchy. And now you obviously you will ask this question, is it true in every parts of the globe? Then you go to, let's say, America, maybe Europe, maybe Japan, or even in remote places where you have tribal or indigenous people. Thinking, because in your observation you are saying, there are societies, at least the recorded societies which does not exist now but it existed 100 years back in your anthropological studies, there were no patriarchal notion even. They did not know what does this mean. Then immediately, essentially, you understand what I'm saying. So you observe, and from this observation you again kind of refine your question further. Then you say that, well, it seems like patriarchy is not eternal or universal. It must be then coming from some particular reason. And it should evolve to address certain questions, and it is still existing today. That means probably we have to understand the root, the relevance of this question because of which it came, whether they are remaining or not, the reasons. So essentially what you do, you perform observation. After this observation, essentially you then make a hypothesis. You say that because of maybe these, the patriarchy emerges. Then again you do your survey, do your study, observation, and so on and so forth. Then, well, the moment that, okay, before I go towards hypothesis, essentially it cannot be random. It cannot be out of the blue, suddenly you something think. There must be something you observed before and you understood to be true. So, the new hypothesis should comply with that. And it must be based on material process and phenomena, must have some testable predictions, and must be falsifiable. That is experimentally verified in some. Okay, and there may be many hypotheses, but all of them to be tested and verified, and at the end you will identify the correct one and eliminate the one which cannot explain everything. And then this hypothesis is accepted, and in particular in natural science often you say that once the hypothesis is tested to be true, it becomes a theory. Unless it is not true. It's just a hypothesis. For example, I don't know, many of you probably heard Avogadro hypothesis in chemistry. That is said that in 1 mole of gas you have take something 2.10 to the power plus 23 number of atoms are there. Nobody tested. But it turns out to be this number kind of gives a lot of correct predictions, but otherwise nobody tested. You cannot count that many number of atoms. Right? So that is why it's called hypothesis. Once someone tests it with a good degree of accuracy and so on, then it becomes Avogadro theory. So in that sense, a hypothesis is accepted to be a theory or a truth the moment it is tested unambiguously. And obviously, whatever you observe, even through your experiment, you demand objectivity. Very important. Because if I myself is biased as an experimentalist, the things I will be observing also can lead to some selective picking up some data, some selective acquirance. Let's say I acquire data in a very selective. It may so happen. Nowadays there are a lot of papers coming, although they are not internationally accepted. They are claiming weird things. They are saying that the cow milk has gold.
Cow urine.
Cow urine as well, but let's say cow milk has gold. Obviously, they are so-called scientists. They do have some laboratories, however unequipped or the infrastructure and all these things what they have. But to come to that conclusion, obviously certain things must have influenced them in order to really go to that conclusion, right? So that is why they say that you're starting from your design of your experiment, starting from your observation, because there may be a situation you only selectively record the data that fits What do you want to do? You got the point. So essentially, you need certain level of objectivity, and that is where there is something called single blind experiment, double blind experiment, third party check and such. Single blind, let's say, for example, let's say you want to develop a drug for some disease. Just for simplicity, let's say corona, right? You want to develop some drug. What you will do? You may say that you come up with some drug which you want to test its viability, whatever it is, you want to test, and you go to a hospital and you give everyone. And you see that people are essentially recovered. But that is not sufficient. How do you know the people are recovering because of their own immunity and not because of then what you will be doing? Sufficient. Because the person who is giving the drug and acquiring the data may also have some biasness. What they are doing then is called double blind. It says, I have obviously two groups of patients, and also the people, probably the nurse or the doctors who is essentially serving these patients with the drugs, they will be given same looking sample of this medicine of the drug. However, one is true drug, another is just a decoy, just a false decoy. Placebo.
Oh.
Right? And then even they don't know which one is actually drug and which one is the decoy. Right? And then they will supply or they give this drug and then they will report. So there are ways to essentially suppress this individual bias and subjectiveness. Only then you would say that yes, even the methods that you are applying ensuring objectivity. Your individual belief, perception should not perturb or let's say interfere. And even that, then they say that anything, let's say after all that double blind experiment and you got some idea about it, third person can come and maybe little bit in a different experimental setup, they again should be able to check. And this again it complies, then only say that whatever the conclusion you got is bound to be true. So there are, and then the statistical methods and all these are there because there are a lot of uncertainties also happen because there's a lot of variation because when you deal with human being there are a lot of variation. Okay? The background, their family background, then the genetic history and all these things. And then it says that these experiments, whatever they have, should be repeatable. And the report of the experiment should be disclosed openly so that any person come and check and recheck. Once these other things are satisfied, then only you say, whatever you claim to be true, is true. Okay, so I don't want to, means, that's why I don't want to repeat it, but at the end of the day you understand how, whenever a scientist say that I understand this, and this is to be science, this is essentially the method that we apply. Okay? And then that's why we say there is no guru. Anybody tells, I don't care. I may have individual respect on that person, but as far as science is concerned, I don't believe. Okay? And then obviously the strength of science is actually doubt. You doubt. And that is why we still doubt on Newton's theory, Einstein's theory, Darwin's theory. You still. And you are open to essentially scrutinize and re-scrutinize. That's why all the sample acquired by Darwin from this Galapagos and this, this HMS Beagle, whatever the sample he collected, are still kept in Natural History Museum, London. Anybody can go and check it out. It's not like stored and hidden somewhere. So it's open. You understand what I'm saying? Anyway, so now, even many cases happen that in science.
Sir, last slide page, I'm remembering something like sometime the conclusion comes from the funding agency or many a time.
Okay.
And now we joke with our friends that your conclusion will depend on the funding agency.
Right.
You know, so they are influencing heavily.
Absolutely.
Now science is in the hand of market,
Right.
and they are using it as a tool, and they are saying that this is the science. You know, they are writing a small note जो हर पैकेट के नीचे लिखा था
Right.
hidden. So how do you respond to this kind of question?
So This part I will come probably at the end. I will have, there are much more striking examples that we are already facing. But at the end of the day, that is where you essentially try to deform the scientific method and its process. And unfortunately, this is what is happening. I have been interacting with some doctors in the civil hospital. They say that nowadays there is a huge market of baby food.
Yeah.
And they have been advertised in such a way and indirectly said that the mother milks are not sufficient, which is not true. And actually it harms the babies. It's happening. So that means there must be, science should be kept out of the influence of these so-called people looking for profit without really caring about what is happening in the planet. I think you are working on agriculture and so on. If you look at vast region of Punjab are actually struggling with contaminated water. Why it is happening?
Contaminated soil also.
Contaminated soil, obviously. Why it is happening? You know, these are the discussion maybe we will discuss on coming Saturday week more. But yes, science, the moment you intervene in such a way that instead of looking for the truth, you essentially try to fabricate some conclusion which will give you some profit. When such kind of interventions are there, it's unfortunately it's obviously not remaining science. So that's how you develop also pseudoscience. In many cases, a lot of drugs are essentially now being
in the
sold
name
on the
of
market
science.
just by
In the name of science, they are poisoning basically.
essentially. It's called destructive use of science and technology. Okay, so I will now go towards another very important point. It still happened in many a time that scientists, after following all this method, can come to a wrong conclusion. And often the reason is that the set of observation they had was incomplete. More and more they add information as an observation. Essentially they realize that yes, something was wrong, whatever the conclusion we had earlier. And science is, the beauty of it is that it is actually self-correcting. The moment it finds that the conclusion of the thing that I consider to be truth is not anymore a truth, it openly accepts. Because its goal is not to establish something, its goal is to really find the truth. Immediately it discards and essentially again do the experiments, recheck, retested with new observations, maybe new method of experiment. And that is why it's called self-correcting. On the other hand, it is universal. Anything that is to be true here is also true in anywhere else in the planet. And that is why there is nothing called American science or Indian science. In today's time, many of you probably know, through this new education policy, there is a term coming, Indian knowledge system. How many of you know? Indian knowledge system. If I consider this data, I will just talk about some which is coming from official channels. Unofficial channels से तो भरा हुआ है हमारा देश में. एक न्यूज़पेपर खोल लो, कितना साइंस का आर्टिकल आपको दिखता है और कितना नॉन साइंस और स्यूडो साइंस वाला आर्टिकल दिखता है. कितना? आपका हॉरोस्कोप, आपका ये, आपका वो, फलाना धमका के धमाका के जो भी वो साइंस का मिलता है, ये तो अनऑफिशियल चैनल. ऑफिशियल चैनल में हमारा एयरक्राफ्ट था.
पुष्पक विमान से तो मैं भी घूम के आया हूँ.
प्लास्टिक सर्जरी स्टेम सेल था. कौन बोल रहा है? हेड ऑफ द स्टेट. टीवी इंटरनेट था. परसों में वो कैलाश खेर एक अच्छा सिंगर है, फैन ऑफ हिम एक्चुअली, बस सेइंग दैट यू नो कंप्यूटर में, करेक्ट, बोले कंप्यूटर में क्या होता है? रैम होता है. वो तो अमेरिकन है इसलिए रैम बोल रहा है, नहीं तो हम राम बोल रहे थे. देखा, राम छोड़ कर कंप्यूटर चलता है क्या? This is how level of stupidity and people are. And actually, I'm very happy to say, at least the student coming from social science departments are still having some element of scientific temperament rather than the student coming from science departments. It's my experience. I've been interacting with students for years. Anyway, so then Ram Setu, Kanada discovered atomic physics. They probably don't know what is meaning. What is the meaning of atomic physics? एक शब्द किसी ने बोल देने से कोई साइंस नहीं हो जाता। तो मैं भी अभी बैठ के बोल सकता हूँ कि चलो 1 लाख साल बाद ये होने वाला है, अगर सोचो मैथ्स हो गया, मतलब आई डिस्कवर्ड दैट। न्यूटन डिड नॉट डिस्कवर यूनिवर्सल लॉ ऑफ ग्रेविटेशन। तो मेरा पहला ही था, आर्यभट्ट ने बोल दिया था, क्या क्या सब है। The problem here is that we believe it. Take one simple example. Let's say this Vaimanika Viman in the ancient texts, in Vedic days. The space technology, particularly the aeroplane, if you look, have you ever fly? कोई fly किया हो कभी? नहीं भी किया हो कोई बात नहीं, YouTube में मिलता है, देख लेना। Actually, these aeroplanes are essentially pinnacle of technology and engineering science. एक एरोप्लेन में कितने सारे चीज होता है पता है? साइंटिफिक मटेरियल साइंस चाहिए, मेटलर्जी, वो जो एयरक्राफ्ट का जो फ्यूजलाज होता है, बाहर बहुत ठंडा होता है, अंदर ठंडा नहीं होता, -50 डिग्री -70 डिग्री सेंटीग्रेड हो जाता है जब ऊपर जाता है, प्रेशर बढ़ता है घटता है। यू नीड टू हैव रडार टेक्नोलॉजी, कम्युनिकेशन टेक्नोलॉजी, you need to have fuel and machine. These jet engines are actually heavily advanced. And then you need to have the knowledge of thermodynamics, aerodynamics, hydrodynamics. Actually it covers everything. Computer science. ये जो automated ये चलता है, ये जो बोलते हैं ना auto pilot, computer. And there are so many, it actually goes to 15 to 20,000 of sensors, different sensors, and all are at the same time being compiled and processed in such a way that it can fly. तो एक एरोप्लेन बनने के लिए इतने सारे साइंस का डेवलपमेंट जरूरी है ना? क्या वैदिक साइंस में इसका कोई प्रूफ है? एरोडायनामिक्स डेवलप हुआ था, हार्मोडायनामिक्स डेवलप हो गया था, है? और ये जस्ट एक बात नहीं है। That is what I was saying. Science is to be a guide to action. If I know and if I claim that this is my science, then based on that, can you make a model of your aircraft that can fly? I will accept it. Neither of these pseudoscientific claims have anything to do with this guide to action. And what is even more important is that all these claims are often made after the scientist discovered or implemented. इंटरनेट के बारे में वो बोलना ही शुरू किया। इंटरनेट कब आया? ठीक से बोलो, 90s में यूज में जो आया, 90s में, उससे आगे पहले मिलिट्री से चलता था। इससे पहले इन लोगों ने कभी बोलेंगे भी नहीं कि इंटरनेट था, क्योंकि इनको पता ही नहीं है। पता तो पहले होता है साइंटिस्टों को। तो इसलिए एवरी सच क्लेम आर मेड ओनली आफ्टर the scientific community announce of having discovered or invented something. इससे ही पता चल रहा है। कितना बताओ, मैंने ये जो मैं बोलना चाह रहा था, every technology requires a development in basic science, different branches. उसका कोई भी बात नहीं है। And actually why I can even, maybe in a later session if there is possibility I will come back again, I can even in a scientific way show that such a development cannot happen in the time of Vedic, let's say Vedic, which is somewhere around 1800 to 600 BC. Okay, so there is no physical evidence. So if I am having a scientific temperament, obviously I will certainly ask for the evidences before even I accept it or rather I propagate it. So now, हमारा देश का जो हालत है मोटी मोटा समझ ही रहे हो, as a student or a science scholar or a person who feels like a concerned citizen and worried about anything that is happening around, should be doing it. यहाँ थोड़ा सा है कि student, teacher, scholar, scientist should first inculcate scientific temperament. यानी जैसे मैं पहले बोला था, साइंस डिपार्टमेंट का स्टूडेंट ही सबसे ज्यादा अनसाइंटिफिक है। मतलब क्या है? हमारा टीचर प्रोफेसर्स हु एक्चुअली हैज डिग्रीज इन साइंस एक्चुअली अनसाइंटिफिक। कितना आप ढूंढोगे? आज सोलर सिस्टम हम तो कहाँ मैंने ब्लैक होल, हमारा जो इंटर यूनिवर्स होकर हम लोग अभी तक जितना देख पा रहे हैं उसको एक्सप्लोर कर रहे हैं। मतलब सोलर सिस्टम को हम कितना छानबीन करके जान चुके हैं। सोलर सिस्टम का एवरी सिंगल थिंग ना, आजकल न्यूज आता है, ओ दिस मीटियर इज कमिंग एंड गेटिंग मे बी फॉलिंग ऑन द अर्थ, हम डिस्ट्रॉय हो जा सकते हैं, रॉकेट बनाओ उनको, वो मीटियर को डिस्ट्रॉय करने के लिए सपोर्ट। मतलब छोटे छोटे पत्थरों को भी हम जानते हैं। भी राहु केतु की डर से अंगूठी पहन के भरा हुआ मिल जाएगा तो क्या साइंटिफिक टेम्परामेंट लेकर चल रहा है? The important point is that in today's time, whether I was talking about patriarchy, whether I was talking about unscientific belief, the casteism, religious mindset, bigotry, सबसे ज्यादा affected होता है कौन? नीचे करते हैं,
weaker section.
तो इन्हीं लोगों के लिए ही और साथ साथ हम खुद के लिए साइंटिफिक टेम्परामेंट को इनकलकेट करना जैसे जरूरी है। एंड वी शुड बी पार्ट ऑफ एक्टिव प्रोपगेशन ऑफ साइंटिफिक टेम्परामेंट इन द पीपल। जैसे मैं आज इधर लेक्चर दे रहा हूँ, ऑब्वियसली दिस इज ओनली फॉर दिस सिलेक्टेड सेक्शन, वर ऑब्वियसली एट दिस स्टेज एट लीस्ट यू आर एजुकेटेड ऑलरेडी। इट्स नॉट, but we need to go to the people in some form, maybe the schools. And obviously I must say I'm expecting at least some of people will join us. The responsibility essentially lies on those people who understand the problem. जिनको पता ही नहीं है वो क्या करेंगे, जिनको पता है उन्हीं को ही करना पड़ता है, right? And then speak out whenever you learn there is a propagation of speak out. अरे वो तो न्यूज मीडिया ऐसे तो भर दिया है, एटलीस्ट कुछ बात तो इधर से भी जाए जो पढ़े लिखे हैं, जाना तो चाहिए ना।
सौरभ की सीडी और वो सब
करेक्ट। एंड एज आई वाज मेंशनिंग, join, we need in India particularly today a new science movement. Without uplifting, without emancipating this downtrodden section which actually covers around 90% of the population, there is no question of progress. No question. It should be. It's our responsibility. And I now will move towards a little bit more on that time. How many of you know Dr. Narendra Davalkar? Do you know? You know? Yes. Narendra Davalkar, in the region of Maharashtra, was fighting against superstitious practices, particularly witch hunting, black magic and so. हमारे देश में जितना साइंटिस्ट है उससे ज्यादा बाबाएं और माएं मिल जाती हैं।
That's better business.
Right? He was fighting against the raging fires. Only one demand he was actually asking for, that any belief or superstitious practice that is harming people should be banned by law. He was actually struggling to bring anti-black magic bill in house. And he was killed. He was martyred on this very day, something around 12 years back. And actually, the 20th August every year is observed as National Scientific Temperament Day. Just think about it. We are living in a time where our information technology and all these things on our hand. Mobile में सारे दुनिया में मिल जाता है. We think of sending human to moon. And even today हम लोग scientific temperament की बात करते हैं. पैट्रियार्की से जो जूझ रहे हैं उनसे बात कर रहे हैं. आज के कितना बताऊं, मैंने आज की देश का जो महिलाओं का हालत देखते हुए आप अगर कोई थोड़ा सा सेंसिटिव हो और गहरे से उनको देखें हैरान हो जाएंगे. साइंटिफिकली हम जानते हैं एक गर्ल और बॉय बेबी होगा कि नहीं कौन तय करता है? फादर। दोस्त किसको ठहराया जाता है? इतना तो लेकर जाओ। वीमेन पर जितना एट्रोसिटीज होता है उसका 40 to 50% होता है डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस, और उसमें दो पर्टिकुलर, एक है डाउरी और एक है ये, थोड़ा सा तो लेकर जाओ। एक सिर्फ आपका जिम्मेदारी नहीं है, ये हमारा भी है। आज की स्थिति में हम इसकी बात करें, and actually it turns out to be all the more necessary today. पहले सिर्फ कुछ प्रिंटिंग मीडिया से स्यूडो साइंस करता, आजकल सोशल मीडिया से इलेक्ट्रॉनिक, और उल्टा तरफ साइंटिस्ट और द पीपल हु आर हैविंग साइंटिफिक माइंडसेट, उनका जो वॉइस है इतना कम हो गया, कोई काउंटर नैरेटिव नहीं। And that is why what we see today, even in our education system, pseudoscience are being propagated. NCERT का recent school textbook देखो, Darwin's theory of evolution को हटा दिया, periodic table को हटा दिया, हिस्टोरी का कई इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट हटा दिया। भाई ये हिस्टोरी है, बदल दो तुम। Analysis, let the historian analyze it. Anything good, anything bad, let rely on them.
ये यहाँ तो मैडम कहते थे उसको।
They have eliminated chapters on democracy and human rights.
फिर वर्कलोड पूरा नहीं होता।
So our education system has now been
टीचर
used
गलती का नहीं बनाया।
रिसर्च साइंटिफिक एजुकेशन का तो आप लोग पंजाब यूनिवर्सिटी में हो, यहाँ हायर एजुकेशन और रिसर्च का क्या हाल है मुझे बोलना पड़ेगा।
ये जितनी आपकी क्लासों के हिसाब से।
And then another very important point is essentially the crisis of
PhD का सारा डाल के आपका तो सबसे ज़्यादा असिस्टेंट के साथ।
पंजाब में अभी जो हो रहा है, अब जो यूनिवर्सिटी में हो आपको पता नहीं चलेगा, गांव में चले जाओ, जिन लोगों को सीजन पर इतना हेवीली डिपेंड होना होता है, बरसात 10 दिन आगे और पीछे हो जाने से वो सर पकड़ लेते हैं। टेम्परेचर से लेकर टेस्ट, ये जो सारे ग्लोबल वार्मिंग की कारण
बस ये तो मैंने दूसरी लगा,
सबसे ज़्यादा इफेक्टेड वही होता है। पहाड़ों में चले जाओ, अभी तो ये खबर इतना कॉमन हो गया कि आजकल ये नहीं होता, हर दिन वहाँ लैंडस्लाइड हो रहा है, हर दिन वहाँ क्लाउड बर्स्ट हो रहा है, मड स्लाइड। ऐसी स्थिति हम स्थिति के सामने हम खड़े हैं। And on the national level, like for example, the question of climate is not just a national issue; it's an international issue. On the national level, there has been several platforms that are trying to build this science movement. One of them, for example, is Breakthrough Science Society. Another one is India March for Science. India March for Science actually started in 2017 to protest against the withdrawal of US government from Paris Climate Agreement. And at the same time to increase fund in education and science. And this is still continuing. In India, every year we also observe this, to raise our voice, to make people concerned, even to students get concerned that what is going on. How many of you knew about all this? Or even if you knew, you understand the gravity of the problem. You have to bring that to the people. This is where your India March for Science. And then there is, on the international level, there is called International Union of Science. This kind of organization of what? For example, it is the scientists against militarism and destructive use of science. You are talking about destructive use of science. You'll be surprised to know one of the largest oil company in this world is called ExxonMobil. It's an American company. In 1970s, they essentially did a research, carried out a research on the impact of fossil fuel burning on climate. And their result essentially said that it increases temperature, the global temperature. They suppressed it. And not only कि उधर रहोगे और Whether it is today or maybe 5 years later, we have to face it. So when we face, at least we should face knowingly. At least that much of concern we should have. And because of this, essentially, this March for Science. I'm just reading out of because I was thinking that maybe this discussion will only be meaningful if it transforms into an action. Just कोई intellectual discussion करना कोई बड़ी बात नहीं है, वो तो हम करते रहते हैं. But at least this kind of discussion should at least lead to some action. And that is where March for Science comes. It says that halt the propagation of unscientific and obscurantist ideas, promote scientific temper in accordance with Article 51(8) of the Constitution. Adopt urgent evidence-based policies to address escalating climate crisis and environmental degradation to protect people from their adverse impacts. To prevent the inclusion of irrational, unscientific content in educational curricula and ensure that education is firmly rooted in scientific evidence and critical thinking. Allocate at least 10% of the union budget and 30% of the state budget. Many people kind of say that, see, it's too much. It's not. If you want, please invite me for another seminar, I will give you. Delhi government was essentially spending 20%, 22% in their education. However, there may be some question how this fund got utilized. But you cannot. Okay? Invest a minimum of 3% of GDP in scientific, technological and social science research. I think these we should highlight. Social science जो रिसर्च का एक सब्जेक्ट है तो आज बता ही दिया गया कहाँ फंड आता है
zero. Now they are not even hiring the teachers.
Enact a nationwide anti-black magic act to eradicate inhumane, superstitious and exploitative practices. Exempt all research-related purchases from GST. Research का जो purchase करेंगे equipment वगैरह उसमें भी 18%, 22% GST. एक तो फंड देते नहीं ऊपर से ये Ensure timely and regular disbursement of scholarship and fellowship to research scholar. Research scholars को regular scholarship मिलता नहीं है. 2 महीना, 3 महीना, 6 महीना, even साल, 1.5 साल तक रुका है. कैसे चलेगा? So these are essentially the demand. Obviously, there are many more you can add on this list. But whatever it is, at least based on this, we can still stand together. And because of that, or to that goal, actually this year, the March for Science is being organized.